Roam through a fantastic jungle of rare tropical plants at Kew Gardens' elegant palm house in London. Wander past intricate bonsai trees in a tranquil Chinese garden that magically blends architecture with nature in Singapore. Then explore an estate garden's romantic pathways that lead to exotic flora on the French Riviera. Join us for a fabulous World Garden tour. World Garden Tour begins in London's famous Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, where an abundance of beautiful plants and flowers are on display. Tucked away in the northeastern corner of this world-renowned garden are the idyllic rock gardens. Gentle waterfalls cascade over an outcropping of Sussex sandstone, giving life to a wide range of moisture-loving woodland plants like phlox. Here, visitors can find vibrant Appalachian, alpine, and Rocky Mountain plants, such as verbena, as well as common garden plants like pink salvia and bright pink poppies.
The rock garden's a very interesting area of Kew Gardens. Almost any time of year, there's something extraordinary growing there. We're very excited about it because it has recently been, a large portion of it has recently been redesigned by some of our younger staff. And it's nice in a garden which has such a history that you've got something which is being redesigned by this generation of gardeners as well. And one of the things about Kew Gardens is that it has evolved over the many years, and while we try to keep many of the historic vistas and perspectives, we also try to give people a chance to develop their own areas and to do something new and exciting, so that it won't just be sort of frozen in time, but there will be something new and something of this century.
Throughout Kew's 350 acres, talented gardeners have created stunning landscape features and scenic vistas from simple pasture land. The serene Great Lake, home to graceful black swans, was developed to enhance the natural beauty of the gardens. And the stately Zion House lends a storybook quality to Kew. This diverse garden, with its peaceful waterways, picturesque vistas, and secluded woodland walks, is also celebrated as being one of the most important educational and scientific botanic gardens in the world. This elegant and dramatic building is a classic example of Victorian design. It's the Palm House, a location for botanical research as well as a showcase for spectacular horticultural displays. Inside the curving glass structure, a jungle of rare and endangered palms, ferns, and tropical plants from every temperate zone in the world grow and thrive. A winding Victorian stairway leads visitors towards the skylit glass ceiling and past a plethora of plants from Africa, the Americas, Asia, Australia, and the Pacific. Narrow paths are lined with lush tropical palms that are cared for organically as part of Kew Gardens' Natural Preservation Program.
The maintenance of greenhouses is an extraordinarily difficult science. We are much more careful about using sprays than we used to be. So now we are trying very much to use what's called biological control, whereby you control one kind of beastie with another kind of beastie and hope that eventually they'll come into some kind of equilibrium. It's interesting because people often expect that Kew shouldn't have any little bites or marks on any of the plants, and so we have very large labels telling about biological control in the garden, because we think it is so important that we are actually contributing to the good of the whole ecosystem, not just having a nice garden.
One of the garden's main missions is to protect rare and endangered species.
The specialities that we have here are plants collected from the wild. This is always done in collaboration with and with the cooperation of the Foreign Institute. We don't go in and sort of steal specimens. And we still send out expeditions every year to collect seeds and small plants which are grown on here at Kew. I think at Kew at the moment we've got about 14, which are the last specimen in the world, which grows here. Many of those are then bulked up by micropropagation, and as we can get a lot of them, we can then return them to the wild when we recreate the environment that they grew in.
Kew continues to look to the future to protect and preserve endangered plant species from around the world, like rare varieties of poppies, with the establishment of the Millennium Seed Bank.
One of the very exciting things that we're just beginning now is a seed bank, collecting the seeds of all the plants of the world eventually, which will be kept frozen so that they can be reintroduced as they're lost.
Scientists predict that about a quarter of the world's plant species are potentially under threat of extinction. So, and that would be by the year 2050. So unless we do something now, then those plants may disappear forever. And even with the modern techniques of genetic engineering, it's fairly unlikely we could ever reconstruct these plants. So this is it now, or we lose them.
With its enormous collections and commitment to protecting the world's plant species, Kew has earned its status as one of the most impressive and beautiful botanical centers in the world. When World Garden Tour continues, we'll travel to the Garden City of Singapore to experience a magical garden that reflects the beauty and serenity of ancient China. World Garden Tour now takes us to Singapore's Chinese gardens in this island's country Jurong Park. Built on farmland, these Chinese gardens are among the most beautiful in the world. Stately white arches create a welcome entry to the garden, as do two mythical marble statues representing the traditional Chinese virtues of authority and felicity.
Well, following Chinese tradition, there's always a pair of lions to greet the visitor at the gate, and it also acts as guardians of the building or park. And we have a male lion and a female lion at the gate.
Inside the gates, lush palms and evergreens, like colocasias, punctuate an unusual garden design the Chinese call physical poetry. This magical landscaping style creates a subtle harmony between the natural environment and the garden's architectural features. Two traditional garden styles are represented here. One characterizes the Song dynasty, which lasted from 960 to 1279 AD, and the other reflects the style of the Great Summer Palace in Beijing.
The Chinese garden itself is built according to the northern Chinese imperial style of architecture. So the buildings which you see are very grandiose, they're very large, and they make use of the gold and green glazed roof tiles, which are special colors of the Chinese emperors.
The architecture and art of the Song dynasty aimed to create peaceful, restrained environments. Colors were soft and subdued and complemented the green, gray, and brown tones of the natural scenery. In contrast, the style of the Beijing Summer Palace incorporated more vibrant colors. Floating on the waters of a clear, smooth lake is the richly colored stone boat structure. It's modeled after the boathouse at the famous Chinese Summer Palace in Beijing. Larger than the one in Beijing, visitors can freely explore the suspended sanctuary into the early evening hours. An old Chinese proverb says, "The moon always shines earlier on the room set along the waterside." The stone boathouse lives up to this ancient proverb, aptly named "To Invite the Moon." The Chinese Garden's tea house, with its gold coffered ceiling, also follows the style of the Beijing Summer Palace. It's a delightful spot where guests can enjoy a fragrant cup of Chinese tea while looking out over the lake into the gardens beyond. In a secluded part of Singapore's lovingly crafted Jurong Park, the Suzhou Garden holds another attraction. Grouped around a lovely viewing pavilion, large, unusual stones rest on pedestals beside lanterns, and amid potted plants and trees. Every stone was selected for its natural artistic beauty, which can be seen in the texture, the color, or the shape of the stone. And the placement of each stone, like the placement of each flower or tree in the garden, is always in harmony with the landscape and nature. As visitors wander through this curious enclave of the Suzhou Garden, they come upon smaller stones displayed on tables. Spectators can move around the stone arrangements or climb up to the viewing pavilion for yet another perspective of this high form of Chinese gardening art.
In the Suzhou Garden itself, it's a more homely feel. The colors which you see are, white walls with dark grey roof tiles, and that's because in China itself, in Suzhou, this was a place where most of the scholars and administrators lived during the ancient days in China, and they built their houses with beautiful gardens. In fact, Suzhou in China is a city of gardens. Well, we're in Singapore, it's a garden city, it's sort of that comparison. And we decided to have the Suzhou-style garden here for housing our collection of bonsai. And we had about more than 50 craftsmen from Suzhou just to build this garden for us.
The art of bonsai recreates some of nature's most stunning and beautiful effects on a smaller scale. Many of these miniature trees were brought in from China. They may only be 10 or 15 years old, yet they're artistically cultivated to look as if they've been growing for decades or even centuries.
We also have our local bonsai, and from the ASEAN countries, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and we try to collect from many other places in the world.
Leaving the Suzhou Garden past decorative Chinese twin towers, visitors can discover another Chinese garden masterpiece. At the far end of the garden, there's a charming covered bridge, which overlooks a reflecting pond. Bridges play an important role in the art of Chinese gardens. In addition to enhancing the beauty and interest of the landscape, they display the characteristics of various periods of Chinese civilization. Extending from the Chinese gardens, a magnificent white bridge stretches across the Jurong River to the modern city of Singapore. Its delicate 17 arches follow the design of the Summer Palace in Beijing. Although this bridge is somewhat shorter, it maintains the restrained elegance of Chinese bridge design. Towering above a leafy woodland area at the edge of the Chinese garden, a 7-story pagoda casts its colorful reflection in the sparkling lake. Its balconies offer visitors a glorious view of the gardens, river, and city beyond, and a wonderful way to complete a tour of these splendid Chinese gardens. When World Garden Tour continues, we'll travel to the French Riviera to visit an exquisite estate garden that recreates the landscapes of Mediterranean climates from around the world. World Garden Tour now takes us to the French Riviera, just south of Saint-Tropez, to an exotic estate garden known as the Rayol Domain Gardens. These extensive and diverse gardens were originally created in 1910 by Alfred Courme, a French industrialist and world traveler. Courme was fascinated with the concept of exotic gardens, and he began collecting plants and trees from far-off locations, such as Mexico and Australia. In 1989, the Domaine Rayol Gardens were redesigned so that visitors could take a garden tour of many regions of the world. At Rayol, Chinese bamboos, California agaves, and Australian eucalyptus evoke remote landscapes.
The domain is a promenade of landscape gardens. Our idea is to evoke the landscapes of Mediterranean climates around the world. The plants are part of the garden structure, and contrary to botanical gardens, where the collection of species is the objective, here the plants participate in the evocation of landscapes.
Upon arrival to the gardens, visitors will encounter a breathtaking view from the Villa Terrace. Its unobscured hilltop location provides an aesthetic vision of the sea and the golden islands beyond that is simply spectacular. Korm arranged his pleasure garden around a pergola of antique inspiration, flanking it with palm trees, eucalyptus, agaves, and mimosa.
The perspective from the pergola was built in 3 stages, beginning in 1910. Today, it is still in the center of the domain, the starting point of the Great Perspective.
Just east of the central pergola is the Mexican and Californian garden. In this dry terrace garden, stone paths lead past spiny cactus and giant yuccas in full bloom. Mexican agave plants enjoy the hot, dry Mediterranean climate and the well-drained soil of this hilltop garden. A sudden wide expanse of green pasture neighbors the Mexican garden, and an alluring French farmhouse can be seen in the distance. This charming stucco building encased in vines reveals arched wooden doorways and tiny windows cloaked in a glorious native bougainvillea. Walking by the old well brings another delight to the senses. An orange tree covered with blue, volubulous flowers.
The gardens are laid along different pathways, so there are many possible itineraries to visit. The visitor will leisurely walk along those pathways and alternatively discover the sea or the gardens looking through the natural openings overlooking the scenery.
A pathway past a rare cork oak tree hints at the garden's next surprising feature. An Asian garden featuring a forest of Chinese bamboo. A refreshing brook is a pleasant point for reflection and meditation before moving on to another of the Domaine Raoul's exciting gardens. Purple vervin signals the entrance into the exotic garden where tropical and subtropical flowers, plants, and trees thrive in the Mediterranean sun. Large pendulous brugmansia and red hibiscus are in full bloom during the long summer months, along with yellow sunflowers and pink vervin. Gigantic ferns crop up from seemingly nowhere, and the surrounding foliage becomes more dense as visitors enter another area of the domain called the New Zealand Garden. Huge palms from New Zealand form a jungle of dense vegetation within this giant fern valley, located at the foot of a great stairway. To the south, an ethereal shaded pathway leads to the sea and to the Domaine Raoul's French garden. In stark contrast to the fern jungle, this formal landscape, with its clipped box hedges and symmetrically placed blue planters, is typical of Mediterranean French gardens from the early part of the 20th century. Located near the beach villa, this domain garden offers another wonderful scenic sea vista.
The garden is made up of contrast. It feeds itself on the quality of light, of time and instance. In actuality, there is no place more beautiful than another.
When we return, we'll revisit Singapore and its Chinese garden to take a closer look at the fascinating art of collecting and cultivating bonsai trees. As World Garden Tour continues, we return to the Chinese gardens in Singapore for a closer look at the art of bonsai. The cultivation of bonsai trees began more than 1,000 years ago in Japan. The name bonsai means tree in a pot. Bonsai are not genetically different from other trees. They're not dwarf versions of a species. Rather, they begin as cuttings or seeds from mature trees. Bonsai are always grown in containers, Otherwise, the roots would spread and the tree would grow to normal size. As the bonsai grows, it's artistically pruned and wired into a desired shape. Bonsai trees like juniper can be grown outdoors. Other varieties, such as hibiscus, can be cultivated indoors. Outdoor bonsai can add distinction to your garden. Displaying trees in colorful ceramic pots on pedestals along walkways can create a formal effect. Another way to display bonsai in your garden is to create a bonsai forest. Grouping various species of elm, maple, and cedar together adds a sense of comfort and unity. This method works well if you have smaller plants. And if you're interested in grouping, note that it's traditional to design with odd numbers of plants. Whether you learn to cultivate bonsai or just become a collector of these wonderful specimens, bonsai enthusiasts promise you a spiritual and enlightening experience. From a meditative Asian garden in Singapore to a lush and diverse garden estate in France to England's premier botanic garden, we thank you for traveling with us and hope you'll join us again next time.